Tears of the Kingdom was one of the best games released last year. It was the secondary reason that I personally bought a Switch, and as such it was part of the reason that I got into the Zelda series in the first place. It was one of the most hyped games I have ever seen. The only other game I can think of that got that kind of hype was Elden Ring. It was critically acclaimed from day one, and since then it's become a favorite for many people, whether they be prior Zelda fans or not. However, in the following months, Tears of the Kingdom fell under greater and greater scrutiny. Many critics, myself included, called it out as being too similar to its predecessor, and a lot of people weren't happy with the game's story, its emphasis on building, and its repetitive quest loop. These complaints started out as a small pessimistic voice in the background behind all the 10 out of 10 game ratings that Tears of the Kingdom acquired. But after a few months, being critical of Tears became as common as not. So now, about a year later, how does Tears of the Kingdom hold up? Looking at Tears of the Kingdom a year later, it's hard for me to not inflict my biases on this discussion. I will try to be as neutral as I can. For full disclosure though, even in the first hours of Tears of the Kingdom, I was pretty sure that I preferred its predecessor, Breath of the Wild, and that never changed. That being on the table, let's take a look at Tears. Tears of the Kingdom is a technical achievement. It is, from a code perspective, the most complex game in the Zelda series by far, and the fact that it runs smoothly on a piece of hardware as old as the Switch is an impressive feat as well. Tears involves a very complex vehicle crafting system that can almost flawlessly account for the physics of a dozen different pieces all doing their own thing within the workings of a larger contraption. The game is impressive if nothing else. But is the game good? Of course it's good. Let's not be stupid here. The boss fights are good, the world is huge, the exploration has suffered a lot because of how repetitive the depths and the Sky Islands are, but overall Tears of the Kingdom has added quite a lot to this most recent iteration of Hyrule. Tears of the Kingdom is a great Zelda game. That much is undeniable. But that's also just the thing. Tears of the Kingdom is a great Zelda game. It's not the great Zelda game. It's not the Zelda game to rule all Zelda games, and that is perfectly fine. In fact, it's quite frankly to be expected. So why am I making such a big deal about it? Well, it has to do with hype. As I stated earlier, Tears of the Kingdom was possibly the most hyped up game that I have ever seen. The fans were wild for it long before it ever released. People expected it to be one of the best games ever released, whether they admitted it or not. This is what we call overhyping. For what should now be hopefully obvious reasons, overhyping is problematic. It means that, first off, you're raising your expectations to a point that the finished product cannot reach. So you are likely to be, at some point, disappointed. The other problem with overhyping is that it's exciting, and because it's exciting, the eventual disappointment is multiplied by whatever factor your excitement is at. Also, excitement is contagious. One person who's overhyped for anything, it doesn't even have to be a game, can easily spread that hype around, and pretty soon a lot of people are set up for disappointment. Now, before we go anymore, we have to talk about gaming honeymoon periods. As you probably know if you've played enough games, most games have a honeymoon period when you first start playing them. In other words, for the first few days or weeks or even months of playing a new game, you can have a bias that the game is better than it is. During this period, it's natural for you to look past or ignore the game's faults and elevate the game's perks. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's part of why your first playthrough of any game is generally the most fun one. And just because you liked something more when it was new doesn't mean that it's bad now that it's familiar. My reason for bringing up the gaming honeymoon period is because while its honeymoon period lasted, Tears of the Kingdom was able to live up to expectations. It was a good enough game that, with a little bit of bias, it was able to somehow achieve the absurd level of quality that people expected. This is why, for a while, Tears critics were few. However, once the honeymoon period died off, people realized that Tears didn't live up to their expectations. However, rather than blame their own overly optimistic biases, a lot of people blamed the game. Now, I'm all for analyzing the nitty-gritty weaknesses of games. I have my own series on this channel that compares Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild and how they handle different game elements, and which games did better where. However, I can't really recommend those videos. They were earlier on in this channel's successful life, and they're not the best content overall. So, obviously I'm all for criticizing Tears of the Kingdom. It's kind of a major point in this video. But there are two kinds of Tears of the Kingdom critics. The first is, I think, healthy. They recognize Tears of the Kingdom's numerous faults as well as its various accomplishments. At the end of the day, Tears of the Kingdom is fantastic despite its many shortcomings. However, there are also critics that flat out claim that Tears of the Kingdom is a bad game. To which I say, what? I mean, Tears of the Kingdom isn't my favorite Zelda game. That title goes to its predecessor for a whole modicum of reasons. But I can't deny the excellence of craftsmanship and quality of gameplay that Tears of the Kingdom still has to offer. I'm not ready for a full second playthrough, although veterans of the channel will know that I did try, but there will probably be a time again in the future when it's worth picking up for another go-round. It's a good game, and anybody who disagrees is one of three things. 1, they just don't like this style of game. 2, they're crazy. Or 3, they were initially subject to overhype, and their initial excitement of the game was shattered when they realized that Tears wasn't as good as they expected. The reality is that almost no game can truly live up to overhype, and the bigger the hype, the harder the fall. It's our own fault, really. Those of us who got so overexcited over this title. There's nothing wrong with a little excitement, but there comes a point where it does more harm than it does good. Everything I've stated so far applied to the first couple months after Tears of the Kingdom's release. However, once the controversy arose and the initial excitement died off, things got a lot quieter, which makes it less clear where Tears stands now. Even I don't know exactly what's going on in the Tears community right now, and I make videos about these games. Part of this is because Tears of the Kingdom really suffers from poor replayability. Much like Breath of the Wild, if not more so, Tears is hard to play a second time around. This is why my initial attempt to replay it failed so badly, despite my replaying of other games almost immediately after finishing them without any game-ruining drawbacks. Part of this is due to the game's pacing. The starting section is even longer than the one in Breath of the Wild, and Breath of the Wild's starting area was pretty long too, and the same problem just continues from the starting area all the way through the rest of the game. There are other additional reasons that Tears of the Kingdom isn't super replayable, and I'm not going to get more detailed than that because I have a video somewhere around this channel about that subject, and I'd like you to go watch that. This makes Tears' situation worse though. People had enough time to get upset about it, and now a lot less people are playing it. It's a real pity, really. So to wrap this whole mess up, Tears of the Kingdom is an imperfect but still fantastic game that suffered greatly at the hands of unrealistic expectations, and since then has roamed about in a stasis of unearned negativity on account of its poor replayability. The negativity that the game has acquired is largely undeserved, because while Tears has many flaws, most of those flaws have been blown out of proportion by people's expectations. Overall, Tears is still an incredible game that got more attention than it deserved upon release, and now gets a fraction of the attention that you'd expect out of a great game like this. If you're still playing Tears of the Kingdom, good for you. It's a great game. I'm not still playing it, at least not right now, but hey, let me know down in the comments what's keeping you still enjoying the game. As long as it's not the length of a college paper, I'll probably read it. The rest of you, feel free to leave your thoughts as well. Anyway, have a nice day.